then something will like flash over here, or he'll move his phone, and the Apple logo will like shimmy in my eye, and I'll forget what I'm talking about. So just know that if you think I have ADD, or if you have ADD, then we're kindred spirits. Most likely our parents just didn't spank us enough. So that's, what do you do about that, right? So this is me. This is what I look like the entire time that I'm speaking. So get used to this, because that happens. Let's get started about responsive design. I love responsive design. I'm a phone user. So at least half of you also have ADD, which makes me feel a little bit better. Hopefully be more tolerant of me while I'm talking. How many of you could have that on the screen the entire time and listen to every word I'm saying? Anybody? No? Of course not. We're developers. We all have a mind with different size resources to different browsers. And the answer to that question is no. What Flexible Images and Media says is that just the media, either via video or a picture, just sort of expands and contracts so it fits in the frame that it's supposed to go in. And so the third thing that makes them up is media queries. So a media query saying that if the screen is this size, do this. If it's this size, do this. If it's landscape versus portrait, do this. If it's a retina display, do this. And the newest ones, which I'm really excited about, that we're still like 3 years away from support, but they're going to be really cool, is if your broadband connection is this speed, do this. Right? How awesome is that? And so the browsers, especially on mobile devices, will keep track of what the average download speed is that the users experienced in the last 30 seconds or a minute, and then it will be able to determine whether or not to load high-res or low-res media, high bandwidth or high kilobyte or megabyte per second video versus low, same with audio. And so we'll be able to do all really cool, awesome things using CSS, which is crazy, right? Like, that shouldn't be possible, but here we are in this wonderful world where we're generating and displaying content using a div on a page and nothing but CSS. And so we're in a wonderful world of, my God, what are we doing, right? Like, we have stepped into the realm of pure insanity, that we've decided that not only do we want to use CSS, but we want to use it more, right? Do we use it for more things that it wasn't actually intended to do? So this is just a quick refresher on what responsive web design is. If you were here last year, or heard me talk before, you've heard me go into much more detail about the basics of responsive design, but that's really not what I want to talk about today. I have, over the past 3 years, launched almost 40 responsive websites. I have made basically every mistake there is to make. I've broken a site in more ways than I knew you could break a site in. And so I really want to go through some things today about ways to develop CSS and JavaScript on a responsive website that really promotes a stable, fast website rather than one that breaks in different browsers. And so there are lots of reasons. Normally I go through all these amazing statistics as to why you would want to do responsive, why it's important for business usage, et cetera, but really it doesn't matter whether it's mobile or it's on a slow desktop. There's really only one reason that you need, or one piece of proof you need why responsive web design is important. Do you guys recognize this picture? Yeah? If you don't, it's when the bottom is when Pope Francis was introduced. The one above it is when Pope Benedict, is that his name? Yeah, was introduced. And so only 8 years difference. Look at the difference in what was happening. Right? Everybody in 2013 had their phone or their tablet out. And if you look really closely, they're all randomly sized. Right? And some people are taking pictures like this, and some idiots are taking pictures like this. And it's don't do the portrait video thing. Seriously? Don't do the portrait video thing. Nobody wants to watch your stupid portrait iPhone video. That's awesome. So let's talk about making the web responsive and what that means. Really, you've got 5 layouts. ADD, hashtag. Yeah. There are 5 options that you have for laying out a responsive website. 4 that work now, 1 that's coming in the not so distant future that I'm really excited for and very afraid of, because it's actually going to mean I'm basically out of a job. Which I'm okay with, because there are far more interesting things than writing CSS. And so if I can get rid of 95% of the work I have to do there and be able to focus on functionality, that would make me very happy. But at the time, right at this very moment, the 5th one, the grid template layout's not ready, so let's talk about the first 4. When you have these 5, you end up looking like this guy, right? Like, you are a web developer, you're juggling cats, you're making things work, everything's balanced and working great, but really, you really have to boil down your options to figure out which one is the best for a certain situation, right? And you guys as back-end developers, you do that all day, every day. Now, how many different ways are there to concatenate strings, right? That's basically web development in a nutshell. We're just finding more and more complicated ways to modify and concatenate strings. That's what we do for a living. And so the real question that we have is, what is the best way, right? In this situation, this is the best way. In this situation, this is the best way. CSS has the same thing. Floats are a very simple way to lay out a website. I don't know if you guys are real familiar with the float syntax. You should be, right? Because we've been using floats for the wrong things since, I don't know, 1999, when floats were first introduced to wrap text around an image, right? Because before that, we would have tables, right? We'd have two table cells in a row, and one would be full of content, the other one would have an image in it, and that would be the way that we laid out our website, right? So they introduced floats. This is the basic syntax of a float. You have two things that are floated left, a width of 50%. So let's look real quick at a demo, because demos are awesome. So this is a website that I've got, right? And we're talking, let's use everything we've learned so far. Let's have flexible images and media, let's use flexible grids, and let's use media queries to determine layout. And we're going to use floats inside of those media queries. So right here what we've got is, let's make this skinny. Hey look, there's my code. So you've got this skinny layout, right? It looks like a phone. You've got a nice vertical layout. It looks really good here, right? You've got your sidebar down below. You've got your content that lays out in a single column. But what happens when somebody decides, I'm not going to use my phone, I'm going to use my tablet, right? Now all of a sudden, this is sort of a goofy layout. The top still looks okay, right? The title and the main content still looks good. But the bottom, those pictures are way too big. The text is really too wide. It doesn't need to be that wide. So what we want to do is we want to create, back here in our demo, we're going to create a media query. We're going to say, if there's a minimum width, that's way too wide. Let's do a minimum width of 20 M. We want it to do something. And so let's say inside the sidebar, there are some articles. And we want them to float left with a width of 33.3333%. Now, you guys will look at that and be like, that is ridiculous, Josh. Why are you using .33333333%? The reason is this. There are browsers that round down, and there are browsers that round up, and there are browsers that render partial pixels. Right? Awesome, until you realize that one pixel makes a big difference in the design. Right? I'll show you why here in just a second. But, so you save this, you pop back over to the browser, you refresh it, and there you go. That's what happens. Now, all of a sudden, when we're under 20 M, we'll have a single column. As soon as we hit 20 M, we'll end up, that was the wrong place to put that breakpoint, obviously. But once we hit that breakpoint, we'll have the 3-column layout. Now, I want to ask you guys a question. How many of you guys have heard of box sizing and border box? Okay, so about 2/3 of you. For you guys, I'll ask you this question. What happens now if I decide I want to put a 1-pixel border on those 3 articles? Now, keep in mind, right? Some browsers round up, some browsers round down, but Chrome is really good at rendering partial pixels, which is awesome for me. It makes this demo way more obvious. So if I were to add a 1-pixel border to these, I want you guys to tell me right now what's going to happen. What's that? That's right. The 3rd column is going to wrap. The reason is because by default, Netscape, back in the Internet Explorer 5 days, Internet Explorer used the box model where the width was calculated including the padding of the border, right? Which makes perfect sense, am I right? Netscape came along, and I'm convinced it was a typo or a bug, and they defined the right way to measure the box model using just the content. And so when I say the width of 33.33333%, and then add a pixel, that's actually 33.333333% plus 2 pixels, which is more than 1/3, right? That's the wrong way to do it. So there's a solution, and the cool part about this solution is it works everywhere in IE8 and behind. So if you support IE8 or after, this solution works fine. Don't add it to existing sites because you'll break all the things, right? But if you're starting a new project, this is a great way to make measuring and calculating your box sizes much easier. Simple this. We'll go like this. We'll uncomment this. Basically what we're telling it now is we want our box sizing to calculate the size of the box using the border and in. Okay? And this works on everything. And Paul Irish actually looked at this particular solution because people were like, I don't like using wildcards for literally every element in the entire DOM, right? And he's like, well, this adds 0.001 0.01 seconds to your load time. We're talking 10 to 15 milliseconds. He's like, if you want to save 10 to 15 milliseconds, minify your JavaScript, right? Problem solved. So you don't have to worry about performance here. It doesn't really impact at all. So when we do that, what we did was we just told the browser, make sure that you are calculating your box size, including the padding and the border. And then you can add all kinds of border, you can add all kinds of padding to it. It doesn't matter, it'll just calculate correctly. So that's floats. What's cool as well about media queries is you can stack them. So now, let's do media. $30M. And you know, the way media queries work is it's CSS, right? It's cascading style sheets. And since the media query with the larger minimum width is below the media query with the smaller minimum width, what we do here will overwrite what we just wrote in that one media query. So if I were to say, I want my sidebar to have a float run and a width of 100%, and borders here because we don't need the red border anymore. We proved our point. And then we'll say it's content, or my content, flow left, the width of 66.6666667, we round correctly, percent. And the sidebar will have a, whoa, thank you. That scared me a little bit. Do you ever get startled by your IDE? Okay, so now we go from mobile, no floats, to small tablet, floats, to desktop. What did we do? Should we look at the code? Let's look at the code. So we've got image, made, that's why, because I made it. It's okay, you can laugh. There we go. There we go. So that's basically, in a nutshell, responsive web design using floats and media queries, right? If you move down the page, as your media query goes from a larger screen size to a larger screen size to a larger screen size, basically you're telling the browser, as the screen grows, do this, and then this, and then this, and then this. Does anybody know why we design mobile first and develop mobile first now? Right? Like 2 or 3 years ago, your gut reaction would have been what? Start with the desktop, right? That's what all my users are. They're on desktop. And then as the screen gets smaller, we'll override with max with media queries. Why do we start with mobile? Anybody know?
Content hierarchy.
Content hierarchy is a great one. How about another reason? Bandwidth, yes. Other limitations, right? What else?
You focus on what's really important first.
Yes, that's another great one. How many of you guys have gone to a restaurant website and been wowed by that 3 megapixel ping file of a lady smiling over a plate of spaghetti? No? No? You guys don't want that image? You don't want that bandwidth and that load time on your mobile device? Come on! Right? Really what it does is it really brings into question what is and isn't important. And what that does for you guys, and me included, is since we're not designers, it really gives us the ability to act like one. Right? So when we're sitting there at our meetings and we start discussing, all right, let's talk layout designers, and they give you this beautiful desktop layout with massive images on some like weird jQuery slider, right? It's wonderfully, beautifully designed, but you know that there's like 10 megabytes of assets here in this mock-up, right? You have to stop and say, well, is this stuff really important? And then you get to call them on their bad habits, which is a lot of fun, right? If you guys, anybody work with designers? Anybody a designer? A little bit? Okay, the designers I work with are fantastic. The designers I've worked with in the past are pompous jerks. So, right? Like, so I agree. It's a lot of fun to be able to call them at their own game. So that is floats in our show. Any question?
Yeah, that's basically what content hierarchy is.
Yes, I know this. Yep. But content hierarchy says this is more important than this, right? So the sidebar would wrap down below. Where is something important at all whatsoever is the same. Like if you have a content hierarchy importance of 0, it doesn't belong in the hierarchy at all, right? Like, get rid of it. So I agree with you. Awesome. So that's floats in a nutshell. There are some really good things about floats. They make it very easy to wrap, right? If you have 3 items with a width of 50% each, the third item is just going to be on the third line, right? That's just how it works. They're very flexible. If you float with a width of 50%, you can be assured that each of those elements are going to be width of 50%, which is great. They align both the left and the right sides, and the way you do that is if you have 2 items, let's say a width of 40% each, The first item you float left, the second item you float right. Those things are going to be nicely aligned on both the left and right side and give you a very justified appearance. The third reason, the other nice thing is they're fully supported in all browsers. Like I said, Internet Explorer 5 had basic floats, only for images, right? And only so the text floated around the image properly, but they did have that functionality. So they're well supported in all browsers. Here's the problem with floats. Whether you know this or not, floats have no height, right? And so if you've got two columns, they're not the same height, and you say I want them both to be a height of 100%, they both have a height of 0. And so they're automatically already at a height of 100%. And so you can't say two columns that are floating next to each other have identical heights if the content inside of it is not identical. And also, you do need to add a clear fix or extra markup with like a div with like a clear bow on it or whatever it is. Whatever clearing, don't do that. But whatever clearing method you use, you still have to do so. So there's added either a clear fix or extra markup to the dot. But if floats are where you stop, unfortunately, you're like colorblind Johnny here, right? You think you've got it all figured out, but in reality, you don't. Floats are the most archaic method of laying out responsive designs. They serve a purpose, and they're really dirty and really fast, and I use them all the time, especially for prototyping. But there are other methods that are better than those. Let's talk about the display table stuff. How many of you guys did websites back in the day where we literally laid out everything with tables? So for most of you, you young punks, you ain't got a clue. Literally make things out in tables, right? Like rows of content with 3 cells. We use so many call spans and row spans. Got these intricate table ways. We should have a contest for that one night. Like, wouldn't that be a fun hackathon, like the most intricate table-based layout ever? That would be I'm going to steal this idea from right now. We're doing it. We're drinking and we're going to layout table-based layout. Awesome. So you put a display table on the parent. You have 2 items with display table cell, and then it lays them out on the table. So let's look at what that looks like. Here, in this particular, we've got 3 different areas. We've got one that's this lighter gray, a second one that's the medium gray, and a third one that's the dark gray. So underneath the table cell, like I said, a main, a secondary, and a sidebar. If on the main, I were to say, on the content, we have display table, and then on each of these, we say display, table cell. And this works responsibly, so we can put this inside of a media query, but now that you know how media queries work, we did that with floats. I'm not going to do that with any of the other ones, but just know that this works the same. So we've got display table cell, display table cell, display table cell. We hit refresh, and then all of a sudden here we are. We've got 3 table cells, right? And notice one thing: they're all the same height. Because what are table cells, right? They're all the same height if they're inside of a row. Now here's where table cells get you. They're awesome because they allow you to do that. And if you wanted to, you can set sizes on them. For instance, we jump back here and we say main, and that's the one with the big image. We'll say it has a width of 50%. This one has a width of 25%, and this one has a width of 25% as well. Tables will, for the most part, be good behaving citizens, right? They will obey your widths, assuming one thing, and this is the one that gets me every time I use one of these. So I use it less than I used to, because it gets me every time. Now, if I were to go back here and say on the image, have a width of 1,000 pixels, right? That image is less than 1,000 pixels at this point, right? But when I hit refresh, even though I've told its parent to have a width of 50%, if there is a child element inside of a table cell that is wider than we've told the parent to be, the parent, in this case the table cell, treats its width as a suggestion, not as a rule. And it's misbehaving in a lot of ways. And if you're not careful, if users have any sort of input in what's being displayed inside of this table cell, you have to be very careful to wrap the image in a div and set a maximum width on that div and do all other kinds of stuff. So this works really well for a couple of reasons. One, it gives you that even height all the way across, right? So that's really cool. Let's go back to the slides because the slides are awesome. They do have matching heights, right? Makes it very easy to say I need 3 columns, 33% wide each. It all has text. All the text is a different height and it's a different length, but I need the background or whatever it is, the border on the table cell to be the same height. And so table cells work really well for that. Another thing that tables allow you to do is they allow you to vertically align the content. Right? If any of you guys have ever tried to vertically align content before, there's nothing in the world in CSS that's more nightmare than vertically aligned CSS. And I actually wrote a blog post on this a couple weeks ago ranting about how horrible it is to do this, and then I found an easy way to do it, so I deleted the blog post and wrote an easy way to vertically align content. But for the most part, right, it is very It's very difficult to vertically align content, especially in a row like this, but this accomplishes it very well. Another part about it is it's fully supported in all browsers. So even if you're still supporting IE6, boo, you're an enabler, but if you are, right, for any business reason at all whatsoever, then know that this works in IE6, and it works really well, and it's stable. And here's the crazy part. IE6 renders tables faster than it renders floats. And so this actually will give you a performance increase over floats. A couple of the problems with this. Widths are a suggestion like we talked about. If you need to have 100% confidence that the parent containers are going to hold their sizes, you can't use a table cell. There's no functional wrapping. There's no way to make table cells wrap. We saw that, right? You'd think that if the width was 50%, 25%, 25%, that would have wrapped both of the second and third table cell because there wasn't room for 25% width there. But instead, it just shrunk. There's no wrapping inside of a table cell unless you add parents. So you've got table row, table row, table row, but then you're manually managing your wraps, and that's not a good way to be responsive. The third problem is that you have to have extra markup if you don't already have a parent available to do a display table on. You will have to add another div or something like that where you can display table. So that's display table cell. Let's talk about text line justify. This one is the one that just makes me really happy, right? Because text line justify is evil. Have you guys ever tried to read a web page that uses text line justify the text? So both sides are like lined up, and then you have this short sentence that's like 3 long words. The fourth word is too long to fit, so you've got like this much space between each of the words, like the space is almost as much as the words on the line. That drives me crazy. It's very difficult to read, right? And from a user experience perspective, the readability goes down by like 25% if you use text line justify instead of text line left. And so I've always thought it was evil, the same way I thought table cell was evil. And so maybe you can consider this talk how to recycle stupid CSS rules to be used correctly or incorrectly, but in a good way for a responsive layout. Right? That's maybe what we should have called this talk. Because text line justify, the great recycler, I don't know. Most of the time text line justify is a bad idea, but in this particular case it's a really good idea. You put on the parent text line justify, and then on all of the items inside of the parent, you simply say display inline block, you give them a width, and you're ready to rock and roll. And I'll show you the code right here. I'm not going to type it because it's a lot, and I get it wrong every time, and so I just pasted it in here. But here's basically what it is. We've got a sidebar. Let's go to the demo first, so it makes more sense if you see it. We have a sidebar right here with like 20 items in it because we're gridding things. Okay, so we come back here, we see this. We've got a sidebar that has padding. Each article we've got display inline block on, so each of those elements, including the pictures, has display inline block, and the parent has text align justify. Down here, we've had to add a little bit extra markup. We've had to add elements to stop the bottom line from having like one here and one here, and that's what these extra elements are here. So let's uncomment this. Save it, jump back here, and boom. I want you to notice something. They're vertically aligned on the top. They're horizontally aligned on both the left and right sides. And the space is perfectly even between them, and I didn't calculate a thing. That's powerful, right? Because the old way of doing this is, in this one breakpoint, you want 2 wide, so it's a width of 47.5%, and then the odd ones, right? The first ones have a left margin, or a right margin, right? And then you have to undo that right margin when you go 3 wide, because you don't want the odd ones to have that right margin, because then the third one will have, and it gets confusing, right? You've got this like weird cascading cancellation that you're trying to do in CSS, where this instead simply allows you to say, no, don't need to. I'm going to give each of them a width of 22%. Now if I come over here and I say, I instead want to give them all a width of 15%. Let's say in a new media query, it just figures it out, right? And so we've taken what I think is one of the worst things in CSS and turned it into something really awesome and fast. And this works out really, really well if you're doing something like e-commerce and you're showing a grid like this. I use this in KidBlog when we have a grid of student posts. And so we'll have a list of 200 or 300 student posts that a teacher can show on the main page of her blog, or his blog. I apologize. And then you see here that they just lay out perfectly nice, right? And the rendering time for this is almost instantaneous. And so that's really helpful as well. And so this is really powerful. It works really, really well. You should use it. I encourage you to. If you need to, like I said, my slides are already available on the website. So you can go get all of this stuff and implement it yourself. And you have the code demo, so you have all of the code to do this. And so a couple of things to know why text align justify is so awesome. no more calculating margins. Never again are you going to say, well, if I've got 3 elements and I want them each to be 90% or 30% wide, that means I have 10% left, which means I really need 2 margins, so each margin is 5%. And you're doing this weird math, you don't have to do that anymore. Very easy wrapping as well. You can just keep adding elements to this, right? Just keep adding elements as much as you want to, and it just keeps stacking just more and more and more, and perfectly aligned in a grid. I actually use this really effectively in Angular with ng repeat, right? And because as I add elements to a object inside of Angular, it just adds them to the repeater. And so it makes it very easy to lay stuff out like this. Like I said, it aligns both the left, the right, and the top sides without you having to do any work at all whatsoever. It's supported in IE8 and all modern browsers, so it's very well supported, which is really awesome. If you have to use IE6, this is not for you. You should probably go back to designing the tables. That's okay. I feel the same way about Firefox 3 that I do IE8. But nobody supports Firefox. So the problem with it is you do have extra marking. Like I said, if you don't want your elements to be weirdly justified, on the very last line you have to add a couple of extra empty divs that have basically the same styles as the actual elements do. So make sure that you just know that and take that into account when you're thinking about this. The other ones is that you get weird typographic issues that arise from text line justify, right? So if you do text line justify, the first thing it wants to do is text line justify all of the children's text, right? And so each of the elements text on the inside will be text line justify, so you have to correct that. It also wants to add a 0.25em margin on the right side of every element. And so you have to correct for that as well. So just know that some weird things happen. You'll notice you'll fix them the first time you do this. You'll never have to think about them again. You'll most likely put this in a SAS mixin that is really easy to use. I'll show you where you can get that later. So let's talk about Flexbox. Flexbox is the newest functional method of laying things out that exists today, and it's really awesome. I really love Flexbox, but in 2009 they decided to design the idea of Flexbox, and this was the syntax that they came up with. Display box, and then you could box orient either horizontal or vertical. You could change the order using box order, and so this was the basic syntax they came up with. But in 2010 they decided what they wanted to do was add functions inside CSS, right? Which at the time seemed like a really good idea, but now looking back at it, that's a really bad idea because CSS is a presentational language, not a logic language, right? There should be no logic in CSS, but they decided they wanted to add some, and so you had to display Flexbox, and then you had to call Flex to initialize the layout of the Flexbox, right? So you could say display Flexbox, but without calling Flex, it just wouldn't lay out. It just wouldn't do it. And so that's this weird in-between syntax. This is the present syntax now. All you have to do on the parent element is call display Flex, and it takes care of the rest. Right? It figures out what the optimum layout is, how wide the children's elements are. There, you have a lot more control if you want to get into the other Flexbox objects and elements. We'll talk about that in just a second. But for right now, this is as easy as it gets to lay things out using Flexbox. You say display Flex. Of course, this was the 2012 syntax, right? This came out in January of 2012. In early 2013, Microsoft released IE10, right? A year after this syntax was introduced, and this is the syntax that IE10 decided that they wanted to use. And so now we're facing a situation where IE9 doesn't support Flexbox at all. IE10 supports this weird in-between syntax, and IE11 supports unprefixed modern syntax. So there's a ton of other weird syntaxes you have to do for IE and for some of the older versions of Safari. But here's the cool part about it, right? You just write a SAS mixin, and it makes it very easy. Like I said, I'll show you those in a little bit. But another really cool part about it is if you use Modernizer, which you all should be using, it has like it has a Flexbox test, and it has a text for Flexbox Legacy, right? So you can say, when you run in IE10, it says no Flexbox, but Flexbox Legacy. So you know that you can structure your CSS to match whatever browser is running just based on a feature set. So surprise, IE10 uses the incorrect syntax, but IE11 is actually really, really awesome. This is Flexbox. This is the W3C's attempt to explain Flexbox, right? It sort of makes sense when you think you've got like a main axis and a cross axis and a start and an end and a main start and a main end and a cross side. And I look at this and really, this is my reaction, right? Like what? What am I looking at? It doesn't make any sense at all, right? Like why are those people's pants on fire? I can't explain this. This doesn't make any sense with this. Like why is that? What is that guy doing? What is going on with this one right here? This one gets me because that guy has no pants on. going on there? And when I spoke at Sunshine PHP, I used pretty much the same set of pictures, and I got a 1-star review because the person said that I have too many naked people in my talk. And I felt really bad at first, but then this is actually what I imagined them looking like. Oh, nine, you didn't, right? So if you are mad at me for having naked people, just know that it doesn't end here. So if this is offending your sensibilities, I apologize. Let me know after, and we'll talk about it. So this is Flexbox Explain. It actually, once you use it for the first time you write CSS using Flexbox, it will snap, right? Like it will make instant sense, because it's actually really, really, really uncomplicated. The problem is not the spec. The problem is the vocabulary that is used to describe the different things that Flexbox does, right? Instead of saying that you should just vertically center things, you have to align items along the cross-axis, right? Like, why is it even called that? Why don't we even say it like that? Why don't we say vertically center items? And so once you get it, you get it, which is fantastic. And so this is the Flexbox syntax that we're going to show today. We're going to just use the newest one. I'm not going to prefix them because I'm using Chrome, and Chrome, the newest 3 versions of Chrome don't require Flexbox be prefixed, right? And so I'm just going to write the normal ones, but just know that it's really, if you add WebKit and MS prefixes, you basically cover all of the browsers. So this is what Eric Meyer said. You may know who Eric Meyer is, right? The godfather of CSS. He said this. He said, let me put it this way. However excited you are about CSS Flexboxes, I'm willing to bet you're nowhere near excited enough. And he's right. They're awesome. If I could use them and only them to lay out websites from here until forever, that'd probably be a bad decision because there are even cooler things coming. But from here until the cooler things that come out, I would totally do that because it just makes things so easy. And so here's Flexbox. Let's look at our Flexbox demo, right? We've just got 4 elements, 1, 2, 3, 4. And they all have different background colors, so you can easily see which one is which. Come down here to Flexbox. We've got items, and you can see here they've got the different colors. So if we do here, we just do display flex. Simple and easy. And hit refresh, and it doesn't work. Ah! Demo. Oh, of course. Thanks. I feel silly. Thank you. So there's Flexbox in a nutshell. 1 command. Total of 11 characters, and all of a sudden we've got vertically or horizontally laid out content, which is much easier than anything else we've done so far, right? And what's cool about it is it automatically calculated the appropriate widths to best make the shortest possible element, right? I never wanted to do that. I work with designers that would have a literal conniption if they saw the OCD would kick in and they would spaz. And so one of the things that you can do with Flexbox, and it's very flexible, is you can just say width of 25%, and boom, you have a width of 25%. Very easy, works really well. But here's where it starts to get really powerful. If I come in here and I say width of 20%, right? Width of 20 ambiguous units. Right, it automatically left aligns them, which is really cool. It's exactly the behavior of float. It's exactly what you would expect it to do, but it gives you the power to do something else. It has a couple of included attributes. So if I do justify content, which if you think about it makes sense because we're talking about justifying the content, right? There are 2 really useful possible values, space around and space between. The first one we'll do is space between, because that's the one I use probably 95% of the time. It simply figures out how much margin is left at the end, and it divides it by the number of spaces between elements and automatically fills it in, right? That's really cool. If you've been writing CSS since the days of like the 960 grid system, where every grid has a gutter of 10 pixels, right? The other one might be a little bit more interest to you, because if you do space around, what it does is it calculates what margin it needs on both sides, and then lays them out appropriately. So that works really well, right? To me, that's really cool, because it saves me a ton of time. It's just 2 commands, and I'm laying things out, where before it was adding elements, and adding all kinds of extra markup, and adding all kinds of extra CSS, and trying to calculate heights and widths, and trying to decide what is the appropriate way to do this based on the situation. You don't have to do any of that anymore. It just works, thanks to Flexbox. But this is where it gets even more interesting. So here we've got our justify content space around. If I were to come out here and say align items, which this is where it starts to get a little bit confusing with Flexbox, right? Because now you're like, wait a minute, line items. Is that aligning this way? Is it aligning this way? Just know that justify content is horizontal, align items is vertical. If I do align items center, all of a sudden, if I scroll down here, you can see we're starting to vertically center things, right? Which is really cool, because this is something that it would have taken a lot of work to do in any other layout method, except for table set, right? But now what happens if we say, well, but I need them to be the same height, but I want to center the content inside of these boxes of equal height. All right, we can do that. So if I come down here and I say, let's get rid of this. So the default, align items has one called stretch, right? That's one of the values of align items that you can assign it. That's the default. That stretches it from the top to the bottom of the Flexbox, much like you're seeing here. So each of these items has a div on the inside of it. So if I come down to item and I say display flex here, and on the div, right, it will be the flex item. I say margin auto, right? Before, if you remember right, if you do margin auto on the left and the right of a div, it would horizontally center, right? But now we can just do margin auto, and it does both of those things. It both vertically and horizontally centers content inside of a parent, while still maintaining the height of the parent. That's pretty awesome. Like, that's something we can't do at this point, right? That's just not something that we are capable of doing without some sort of JavaScript. And so Flexbox is giving us the ability to be much more, I don't want to say creative, but much more intentional with our layouts, right? It's allowing us to say, this is exactly what I want to do with my layouts. Let me define it very specifically. It's very declarative. I want it to be in the center. I want it to be, the margin to be in between the three items, or around the items. So it allows us to do exactly what we want to do with our elements. All right, so I can't click today. Awesome, there we go. So that's Flexbox. Flexbox is awesome for a lot of reasons. The first reason is that the code is very easy to write once you get it, right? Like I said, the light bulb will switch, it'll come on, it'll make perfect sense to you, and you will say to yourself and everyone around you, how the heck did I ever write CSS without Flexbox, right? It doesn't make any sense. Every time you have to go back and support something that doesn't have Flexbox in it, you'll want to punch yourself in the face, because it's just horrible compared. And even now, every product that I write, I lay out with Flexbox, and then I have to write a no Flexbox fallback, right? Which is really hard, given the fact that I want to lay it out in Chrome, right? So I have to open up IE and use it that way, it's a mess. But beyond that, it really does make you think about what the best way to lay it out, and Flexbox will make you a better front-end developer without the need for just Flexbox. It's also very flexible, thus the name Flexbox, right? It allows you to do things just about any way you want to. It's a combination of all. You can change the order, right? So you can say, you can define the flex order on every single one of those elements, and it will rearrange the order of the content as it's displayed without rearranging the order inside of the content. And so it gives you the flexibility to say, on desktop, I want this thing up here, but on mobile, I want it here. And you can rearrange the order however you see fit. And it does allow for both vertical and horizontal centering, which is rare in the CSS world. Flexbox problems, there are only a couple. The first one is that there are 3 different syntaxes, and so you have to account for that. The oldest one, the box syntax, is mostly gone. The oldest version that you have, if you support all the way back to Firefox 13, you have to still support it. But other than that, you don't. Since it's support Firefox 26, it's probably not a big deal for you. It's supported by IE 10+, Chrome and Safari fully. Firefox is also included on that list as of version 28. They will fully support the entire Flexbox backend. At this point, they don't support wrapping, Flexbox wrapping. So that's a problem that they have. And so one of the ways that you can sort of abstract away all of the Flexbox commands that are a little bit more difficult to use. This is a mixin library that I helped write. It's got, I want to say, 250 mixins in it, including a full mixed set of Flexbox mixins that automatically support all of the old syntaxes, and all you have to do is write the new syntax. And so that allows you to support all of those older browsers. And so if you want to use it, go check it out. There are instructions there for using it as a Git submodule if that's your thing. Otherwise, you just import it and use it inside of your SAS. Now, if you're not a SAS person, right, and you're like, well, what good is that to me? You can see the logic behind how to take the newest syntax and turn it into the older syntaxes, so you can teach yourself how to do it there. So that's the only plug that I'll have for this entire thing, and really it's free, so it's not really a plug. It's more of a like, you should use this because it's free. So this is what's coming. This is the one that really starts to worry me for my future, the grid template layout. Anybody ever heard of this before? I talked vaguely about it last year because I was enthralled by it, and I'm even more now because it's starting to appear in the newest versions of browsers, at least portions of it, which I'm really excited about. Basically, it says that if you assign a flow, which is a string of characters, to every element that you want to lay out, and so in this case, the header is A, the main is B, the sidebar is C, and the footer is D. And we say display A, B, C, D, and the browser says, all right, A is above B, which is above C, which is above D, and it lays out looking something like this. Very easy, right? But what is really interesting is when we decide we want to do responsive, and inside of our media query we say A, B, B, C, D, 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 and all of a sudden we've got a responsive layout that's laid out like this, with a width of 66.66667%, and a width of 33.3333%, and no floating required, no other markup, and all we've done is a visual representation using ASCII characters inside of our markup. Now it gets really interesting when we want to apply like our 12-column grid to it, right? We can get really flexible, and it becomes very interesting what we can do with this particular layout module. And so if you want to go read about the grid layout template, you can go read the W3 spec on it, or the CSS working group spec. It's 78 pages long. This is on page 12, right? The other 77 pages are new ways to lay out tables using divs, and it's super confusing, right? Like, it's the most bizarre syntax I've ever seen in my life for anything, right? It makes some of the things that JavaScript do seem simple and understandable and logical. And Microsoft said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to implement this amazing CSS3 grid layout template method, but they implemented everything but this, which is awesome. So this isn't in browsers yet, which sucks, but for the most part, it's coming. Like, there's a ticket in Chrome, in the Chromium project and in the Firefox ticket queue to do this. And there's somebody who's already been assigned to it, so it should come sooner than later. So this should be really awesome. And actually, this would be a really easy layout method to write a polyfill for JavaScript. And so I'm sure that will come sooner than later. Some other quick tips. We still have 5 minutes. Great. Here's some other tips. Some things that I've learned along the way that may help you immensely. The first one, like we talked about, box size and border box. As long as you're starting a new project, you should be doing this all the time. It makes a world of difference. It makes everything really, really easy. CSS3 calc, right? This is the one function that made it out of like the CSS3 we should use functions era into the CSS3 functions are stupid in CSS era. And this one actually makes a lot of sense. It allows you to mix values, or unit values, right? When you're trying to figure out a certain width. So if you say width, say calc 100% minus 20m, it just figures out what that is, right? And it's responsive. Where in JavaScript, if you were to do that, what happens is you assign a value, right? You say 100% is this wide minus 20m, or is this wide, and then you assign a static size to an element. Now what happens if they rotate their phone or change the size of the browser? This just does it all on the fly, and it's very performant. So it's a great way to figure all that stuff out. M's in media queries is a great way to keep everything relative. I don't know if you have parents that zoom on their computer, right? My parents zoom everything in their browser, and sometimes on purpose, most of the time not on purpose, but they do, and it really annoys them when they zoom in on a page and like the entire half is cut off because now it's too wide for the frame. What M's in media queries allow for is, as someone zooms in, it doesn't just get wider or bigger, it actually goes through the breakpoints. So if you zoom in far enough on a page that uses M's in the media queries, you get the mobile layout. Really big text, right? The menu button's like this big, but you get the mobile layout and all of the content is still on the screen, which is great. And so from a marketing perspective, you don't lose anything when one of your users even accidentally zooms their browser tab, which happens a lot when you consider that if you hold down the control key and scroll, all of a sudden you're zooming in. Now, that's what happens to my mom all the time. I told her I was going to use her here, so you don't have to feel bad for her. She knows. So responsive images, this is another really interesting one. The hardest problem that we face as front-end developers today isn't layout, it's not browser support, it's how do we deal with the fact that we've got devices using a 3G connection accessing stuff, and then we've got, Retina display MacBook Pros, right, accessing the exact same website. Like, how do we deal with that when it comes to images, right? We have two options. Before we had two options. One was to serve up the mobile version to the big computers and have it be performant for mobile devices, but have it really, really suck for the quality really, really suck for the larger devices. Or we serve up the really, really big pictures to mobile, right? And it's great for these guys, but it really sucks for mobile users, right? Those were really our two options, but luckily we have more now. This is source set. This was approved by the W3C and by the CSS working group. And what it basically defines is you take the image, you say use banner.jpg unless it's a 2x, the screen that use banner.hd, or it's wider than 100 width and then use banner phone, or it's 2x and wider than 100 width, use banner phone hd.jpg, right? Very confusing syntax. No other piece of HTML or CSS uses the source set syntax at all whatsoever, so it's extremely confusing, right? It's ambiguous. You don't quite know what's going on there, but it's been approved and it's in the newest version of Chrome, so it's there and you can use it, right? But it doesn't work anywhere else. This is the picture syntax. This is the one that was dead and has now been revived. It's sort of the zombie tag, and I'm really excited about this one because this one mirrors the syntax of the video tag, right? So the video tag, you have different sources that you can define depending on the browser, so they have the right format of video. So you can either Octafura or MP4 or what's the other one? That was big for WebM, I guess, was a thing for a while. I don't think it's a thing anymore, but you've got all of these options where you say, well, if it has a minimum width of 768, do this one. Right now, here's the best part about this particular syntax, right? It's very readable because it uses the same media query syntax as your CSS does. And so it's very clear exactly what's going on with this particular picture element. Now the problem is this: one, it's not in any browser yet, right? And two, even when it gets in the browsers, we're not going to be able to fully support it because things like IE aren't going to have it until IE 13. Right? So that's a problem. And so Scott J. went out and wrote this. It's called Picture Fill, right? It's a little JavaScript library. Weighs about 3.5K when it's gzipped and minified. And what it does is it goes through your content and it looks for this syntax, right? And when it finds this syntax, it figures out what size your screen is and exactly how or what image it should use. And then it writes out an image tag and then requests the image. What's cool about this is, one, it delays your image request until after the page is loaded, so it feels much snappier for your users. Two, it's very, very fast. The last projects I used with it, we had 250 images on one page that uses picture fill, and it took less than a tenth of a second, or less than 100 milliseconds to go through all of those images and make image tags for them. So that's very fast, very performant. Also, what's really cool about this is since it mirrors the picture syntax, right? He's running a polyfill that will work for older versions of IE, that if you use the real picture tag, it will turn it into this and then run it through picture fill. And so we're very close to being able to use the picture tag, which I'm really excited about. Here's another responsive image strategy that I recommend if you don't have control of the images as much as you'd like. Let's say it's a piece of user content or something like that you won't be able to use picture fill. If you take an image, you open the image in Photoshop and you save it out at 2.2 times the size you need it at. So if it's a 1,000 pixel wide area, right, you save it out at 2,200 pixels at 0% image quality. So you 100% compression inside of Photoshop. It will look like absolute garbage when you're done being saved, and you'll think to yourself, Josh, that guy is an idiot, right? I'm never going to listen to that guy talk again. And then you put it in your browser, and something amazing is going to happen. It's going to look really, really good, right? There's something about all the browsers use the same dithering algorithm for changing the size of a JPEG. And the JPEG artifacts that are created from saving out at extremely low quality just disappear. And I have proof of that. Because I can tell you people don't believe me. So here's two images. Here's one of them. Let me scroll down to this one. There's another one. Back to the top one. Back to the bottom one. Alright? I've shown you both of those images. One of them is a 2,200 pixel wide JPEG, saved at 0% quality, weighs 71K. Another one is a 1,000 pixel wide JPEG, saved out at 60% quality, which is the right quality to save it out as a JPEG, right? And it's 144K. One of them, the 2,200 pixel wide image, works on everything from largest screen all the way down to the smallest mobile. Okay? The other one only doesn't work on Retina. So I want to ask you guys, let's take a vote. Which one of those two images do you think is the 0% quality image?
Top one.
There's one. There's the other. There's one. There's the other. Which one? How do you think the top one? How do you think the bottom one? So we're evenly split 50-50, which should immediately tell you that statistically there's no difference between the two images. It's the top one. The top one, if I were to zoom into 100%, you would see horrendous JPEG artifacting to the point where you think to yourself, my God, this guy does not know what he's doing. he's a fool, but for some reason the JPEG artifacts just disappear when you're using these images in the browser. So this is another way of managing responsive images if you don't have direct control of the context. You can't upload 6 or 7 versions of the image and run through them with another method. One last thing, you can use media queries in JavaScript now. So it used to be where you would have a media query, then you would have something that would happen or an event that would occur because the screen is a certain size, right? So you'd use, back then I used jQuery for everything. So I'd say like window.width, right, equals blah, 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 blah. And if window.width is greater than this, do this. And if window.width is greater than this, do this. The problem with that is this. Chrome, when it returns window.width, gives you the width of the browser without the scroll bar, right? It gives it to the edge of the scroll bar, which is perfect for Mac, but PC users will know that every scroll bar is 17 pixels wide, every device has one, right? And it's always there. And so Firefox, on the other hand, when you do window.width, returns the size of the screen with the scroll bar. Haha. So you think, well, what does IE do? IE8, IE7, IE6 gives you the width without the scroll bar. IE9, IE10, and IE11 give you the width of the screen with the scroll bar. And so what that means is that JavaScript width is different than the CSS width, which is always the screen without the scroll bar. And so it doesn't work to do the window.width method. You have things that happen 17 pixels apart. And so the right way to do it is this. If window.matchMedia, and then you pass in the media query, in width of 768 pixels, or in this case 48 M, dot matches, so it's a Boolean, do this. Otherwise, do this. Very easy, works really well, and matches CSS perfectly. If you are a person who needs to support IE8 and IE9, this doesn't work, but guess what? Modernizer comes to our rescue again, and it has this awesome, it's modernizer.mq, and then you pass it in a media query, and it gives you back a Boolean of whether or not that passes. So it works exactly the same way. That works all the way back to IE6. So any questions? Yes?
I was really impressed with those different image options, but I'm trying to understand why do you pick one over the other? Making the big image or making the alternate images. What are some of the pros and cons?
Pro of making one massive image, saving all the quality, and then just using that everywhere, is that you have to have one image, right? And that's awesome. And there are a lot of times when you can only upload one image. Say you're having a blog, you're just putting an image in there or something like that, right? And it's a huge image, that's the right way to do it. If you have control, it's better to do it the other way for a couple of reasons. One, if you have a massive image and the browser has to scale it down, there's actually a fairly significant performance hit from that, right? It takes about 125 milliseconds for the browser to scale down that large of an image, which in the most part is a huge deal. It's much faster for it to do that than trying to serve up a mobile device with a massive image, right? It's much faster for it to try to render down that small one. Another reason why it's not great is if you were to put 4 or 5 of these inside of an image rotator or a slider or a carousel, you'll see significant animation lag, especially on IE8, IE9, and IE10, because of their lack of proper opacity support. So if you're fading between 2 of these images, you'll just get 1 frame, and so it'll just switch over the course of a second. So there's a performance hit involved, and like I said, it's not the end-all be-all solution, but it is a great solution if you have, the opportunity to only have one image in any particular case. So, anybody else? All right. So this is where you can rate me joined in. Please do so. And other than that, if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter or see me after the conference. Thanks.